Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the ICJ's recent ruling as far as on Israel's occupation. Of course, saying that the Palestinian territories which are occupied by Israel are clearly unlawful. We'll be talking about this advisory opinion and of course what the jurisdiction itself and its ramifications and what are the parameters of the jurisdiction itself. As far as the ICJ is concerned, we've also had Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif welcome the ICJ advisory opinion. He's called for the international community and the United Nations to implement the ruling to ensure that Palestinian self-determination through a two-state solution. We've also had the ICJ President Nawaf Salam say that the court considers that the violations by Israel of the prohibition of the acquisition of territory by force and of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination have a direct impact on the legality of the continued presence of Israel as an occupying power in the occupied Palestinian territory. The sustained abuse by Israel of its position as an occupying power violates fundamental principles of international law and renders Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territory unlawful. We'll be talking about the ramifications overall. We'll also be talking about what this means overall for the world, for the powers, for those that can make a difference, and how much pressure this will lead to in actuality for the cause of Palestine, so to speak. I have with me today Dr. Salma Malik, who's a foreign affairs expert. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, who is a former ambassador. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Adnan Sarwar, who is an IR expert. Thank you for being with us. And Ayesha Malik, who is an international law expert. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Salma, like I said, and we've seen the statements that have come from the ICJ president also. Let's talk about what this means in reality. Of course, its power, its significance as a statement and the reality of it also.
Thank you so much, Mahrukh. This is very unfortunate. I mean, it's at the legal front, it is a small big victory in a sense, which Barrister Ayesha would discuss with you better. But the fact is that at least there is a legal verdict on the issue which talks about the fact that whatever has happened so far is unlawful. It needs to be stopped immediately, and any further action is should not take place. Under the law, it should not happen. Whatever Israel has done is unlawful, and occupying the territories, making the settlements, putting people there, wrestling the right of self-determination as well as self-expression from the Palestinians, all of that is absolutely incorrect and wrong. So all of those things have been established as a result of this verdict. But the unfortunate reality to this verdict is that it is not a binding verdict. So they have given this verdict, again under a lot of international pressure. The best bet is that this will actually be used by countries or by the Palestinians to make their case more vocal and try and canvass people together and have them speak for them.
Right, fair enough.
So,
let me come back to you. I'll go to Ayesha Malik and then to Ambassador Sabji. Ayesha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is, of course, we know at the outset that this is not binding, but in the sense, how we look at it, is it a case in point? Is it another endorsement, a significant one for the cause of Palestine? As so many rally behind it, will it give or does it mean more pressure in the world arena? How do you look at it as a lawyer?
So this is a historic landmark judgment from the ICJ. It went even further than some of us who are very optimistic about what the ICJ would say in this opinion could have even hoped for. They really, they were asked to give their legal opinion. So it's not binding, but it holds a lot of legal and moral authoritative weight. And so it is incredibly important to tell us what the international law is, what applies to Israel and what Israel has not complied with. And so what the ICJ has said is that your occupation is unlawful, your settlements are unlawful, your annexation is unlawful. But where it went a bit further than we had even hoped was that it said every Palestinian that you have kicked out in the course of your occupation, which has been a 56-year-long occupation, they have the right to return to their homes, and you have to pay them reparation, you have to pay them compensation for what you have done during the course of that occupation. The court also came close. It didn't outrightly say it, but it said it kind of couched in legal language, a bit ambiguous language, that Israel and its policy of racial segregation could amount to apartheid. So really, this is a very, very important judgment. We have not had a judgment like this for about 20 years in the sense of what it means.
But of course, we know that it's not binding, but how enforceable, or do we go to the UN to enforce it? How will the UN look at it? What are the next steps?
So what the court has said in giving this legal opinion is it is saying what the international law is, which binds the international community. So what it has said, the legal consequences of their findings are that it is incumbent upon every state in the international community to now bring this occupation to an end. It has to do that firstly by not aiding and assisting Israel in maintaining its occupation, and also it has to do that through the UN, by virtue of which it means the General Assembly or the Security Council. They have to now figure out the modalities of how they're going to implement this and how they're going to end Israel's occupation. So it is for that reason also a landmark judgment that it makes this incumbent upon member states. We have seen this before in 1971 in Namibia when South Africa was, had an apartheid regime and was occupying Namibia and Southwest Africa. You had a similar advisory opinion. Then we know that galvanized the international community to hold up this piece of paper and say, this is the international law you are violating, and bring that apartheid and the occupation of Namibia to an end.
Right, fair enough. Let me come back to you. I'm going to include Dr. Jamil in the conversation. Dr. Jamil, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
In terms of the pressure, of course, the legal side of things, Ayesha has sort of, talked about. We'll also go to her again. But overall, in terms of the pressure, we know that the one country that can, and I think we've spoken about this with you also from time to time, that the one country that can really make a difference as far as Palestine is concerned, for the people, for the children, for the barbarity that is happening, against it, is the US. Do you think it's going to be that turning point? Do you think that it's going to, apply that kind of pressure that we want, on those that matter for things to change?
Surely it's adding on to the pressure, but it depends how much pressure is added on and what are the tools available to ensure that this pressure works, and what are the modalities of these pressures to work on Israel and of course, to convince the United States. Now, those are available in the international law. First of all, the court was very clear. It's one of the landmark ruling of the court, and it has interpreted its legal connotation as our other panelist was describing it quite well. That one thing is now settled, that the highest court of the world, which is meant there, ICJ is basically meant to settle the legal disputes of states, and as against ICC, which focuses on the individuals, and the jurisdiction is genocide and crime against humanity. But this is basically to settle that dispute. On this dispute is one of the longest outstanding dispute, like Kashmir, and like Kashmir, India has been violating all the international law. Israel too is violating all the international. I will give you a few examples of that. 67, there are about more than 7-8 Security Council resolutions which are the international law, and that has not been really followed by Israel. Israel has not really considered it. Even this, once the Israeli reaction was off, they just ignored it, and they said that it is not really acceptable to them. while the United States, Mr. Graham, the senator, was also very clear that these kind of ruling they cannot be adhered to. Now, what are the tools available
I'm going to interject, just to sort of understand, as far as the UN is concerned, we've also had, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres say that he's going to transmit the advisory opinion to the 193 member UN General Assembly. In terms of the next steps there, in terms, of course, we know the Constitution of the United Nations, we know, where the power lies, how the overall the numbers and the states that matter. How do you see it, being taken up there?
They're only, the last resort if the world community feels it that way. Of course, the General Assembly is going to overwhelmingly endorse this ruling, and there would be almost the same results as we saw it in case of the Gaza war and in case of the cessation of the war. So I think that kind of overwhelming majority would support this idea. That could be very conveniently guessed and assessed at this point. The bigger question is, the General Assembly, once the Secretary General sends it to the General Assembly would refer it to the Security Council. In fact, Secretary General has the authority to send it to the Security Council if it feels that it is affecting the world peace and world security. And once it goes to the Security Council, we all know that what happens there, because it obviously would be vetoed even at the very early stages.
Do you think it will be? Do you think? Let me also include Dr. Adnan Sarwar Khan, who is an IR expert in the conversation. I'll come back to you. To follow up on what you are saying, Dr. Adnan, do you think the kind of overwhelming pressure that we expect there to be after this ruling, of course, and we've also seen the huge number of people march out, whether they've made a difference or not as far as Washington is concerned, London is concerned, people come out in record numbers against what's happening in Palestine. Do you think that there will be that kind of, do you expect a veto?
Thank you very much. Actually, from my side, I'd like to clarify one technical thing. As far as I have this basic knowledge, but probably the panelists may add to that later on, that the International Court of Justice judgments are binding and they are orders. But the problem is, it's not the problem that they are not binding, but the problem is that ICJ does not have the enforcement mechanism. This is the real problem. And here you see it faces lots of impediments based on the political policies of the countries of the world, particularly in the United Nations Security Council. Now, as far as your basic question was concerned, that yes, the international community has arisen, and in big numbers, never ever seen in the history regarding this dispute. This is indeed phenomenal. More than I would say in the Muslim countries, in the non-Muslim countries, the United States, Washington, New York, Paris, everywhere you see the crowds have been in lakhs, millions. But the problem again is here that this is something which is actually the mockery of democracy by the West. They say about demonstrations and public opinion and its respectability as great democrats and champions of human rights and peace, whatnot, but they are not listening to the big voice, strong voice of the people of even their countries. So this is something very, very disappointing. It shows their double, rather triple standards, and they've got exposed really. That in the matters that they take interest, they hear the voices of the people and talk about human rights and this and that, but here you see when bloodshed, never seen in the history in the recent centuries, I would say, 39,000 killed, 2/3 of them women and children and old and sick. So just imagine the carnage. Now, despite of that, I'm optimistic that as it had happened in case of South Africa, when apartheid policies of the white minority government was there, United States was towards white minority, but due to the pressure of the people, it changed its policies. So I think that if this political battle is lost, which is being lost by Israel and the United States and UK, all those countries, by the way, which are providing aid and assistance, etc., they are also part of this genocide. And as Mr. Karim Khan, the prosecutor of ICJ, had said, that it is something which is the war of extermination of the Gazan Palestinians. So this is it, and just not forget.
Dr. Adnan, I'll come back to you. I want to go for the clarification to Ayesha, because I think she's the right person to ask before I go to Salma here. Ayesha, is the ruling in an advisory capacity? Because, there's some clarification needed in that regard, and, whether and how binding, or whether it's just an enforcement issue. How do you see it as an international, lawyer?
Yeah, so just to clarify on this, contentious cases which are brought to the ICJ, so let's take South Africa versus Israel, the rulings in those cases are binding because this is an advisory opinion. This is the General Assembly, which has come to the ICJ asking for their legal opinion. This is not binding in the same way as its other judgments are. It's an advisory opinion. It's not a judgment in the same way as you would have in a contentious dispute, so they're not binding in the same way.
Of course, like Dr. Adnan is also saying, it does mean an immense pressure on those that are supporting Israel in any way, whether tacitly or overtly or openly. There's no denying that. Dr. Salma, there's also, they've said clearly, as far as the judgment is concerned, that their capture of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip are all illegal. Yet, every day, even as we talk today, there's no backing out, there's no retraction by Israel.
Absolutely.
Do you think it's just, a case of just tyranny that, the world is watching and there's no other way to look at it?
Israeli actions have been an extreme impunity. And the point that Barrister Ayesha also pointed out, that it's not only the current occupation or illegal throwing out of people from their homeland, it is returning of every Palestinian who has been forced to leave the homeland. However, none of that will happen unless and until you have the entire globe coming together, putting its efforts together and making Israel do what it has to do. It could have happened if a certain block of countries could have put their weight behind the Palestinians. It could be the block of Muslim countries. It could be several other combinations.
Or for example, allies like the US, which
exactly, allies like the US as well. But even if US was not putting its weight behind the Palestinian cause, even if you had some powerful other countries who would have done that, US would have been on a very negative shade, so they would have had to take some action. Even now we would see that the US would do, and whenever there has been a pressure by the international community, the US has done the type of symptomatic and rhetorical statements and tried to enforce, ask Israel to enforce better treatment. But Israel knows that it can get away with murder.
But we talk about, Dr. Jamil, I'm coming to you with this, but we talk about a US which says that, let's go and give them more aid. And then we talk about, a US which knows that Israel is going to continue bombing and continue, taking the coercive action that they've been taking. The tyranny will continue. So that effectively, of course, the lip service or whatever, it really doesn't count. And even that lip service has been, precious little if one looks at what's happened. But as far as the US politics within the US is concerned at this time, do you think that can have a favorable impact on the situation? Because of course the elections and overall situation. How would you look at Palestine in the light of what's happening at home in the US? Dr. Jamil, can you hear me? Dr. Jamil, I think there's a problem with audio. Before I go to Ayesha, Adnan Sahab, the same question to you. As when you look at the international relations, when you look at the politics at home in the US, do you think that can have any favorable impact? Because the pressure might be more with the elections and with, of course, the public pressure that's coming up with this ICJ ruling. Do you think that can combine to make an impact?
First of all, I'd like to clarify this in a half minute, so that the judgments are binding of the ICJ because they are orders. And here, if you see the wording, they have said that this war must be ended as rapidly as possible. The very occupation since 1967, they have occupied some 70,000 kilometers of area of the Palestine. Anyway, coming to this new round of question, the point is that generally speaking, the United States policies, foreign policies and defense policies also of the Republicans and of the Democrats have been 90 to 95% same. So as far as the pressure is continuing, yes, I mean, people, particularly the Muslims, non-Muslims as well, were very, very annoyed against what Biden was very lukewarmly doing. And yet, you see, he would always say that he is going to bring peace, etc. But now, very, very ironically enough, the incoming president, if he becomes the president, it is a likelihood, Trump has been quite aggressive towards the Palestinians. And he has said on record that he will say to Israel to get the work finished, even if it would mean 30,000 more killings of the Palestinian innocent people. So you see a dramatic change in which you see there's a pressure of China and Russia and the rest of the other countries, particularly countries like Spain also outside, whose deputy prime minister said in his one of the speeches that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Deputy prime minister of Spain saying it. Hats off. So if the political pressure increases, diplomatic pressure increases, and then you see, I would say that some kind of sanctions, if not by the European countries, at least those 145 countries which have recognized Palestinian statehood, some kind of diplomatic lowering of the diplomatic mission there. And you see, now coming to the point that I want to make, that the world is such that despite all these high-profile political and strategic matters, you see, if our OIC and Arab League, for example, to begin with, do not strengthen their military muscle and do not come up with something like near to NATO, and if the attack on one country or one nation of the Muslims is considered attack on all and they bury their own headset, I think, you see, this kind of world which is over-dominantly, over-realistic and power politics based, everything is happening in front of eyes, very cruel world in concerning with certain countries like Israel, United States and those countries. I think we have to be combining the carrot and stick policy. Otherwise, only God can save the Palestinians.
Right. Ayesha, do you think, let's talk about sanctions. Let's talk about whether, expecting sanctions from the UN is a realistic option at this time.
So sanctions from other member states could be more likely, especially European ones and others who don't want to trade. The UN might not, because we might have the US veto on because the US is on the P5. I just wanted to make a comment about the US. We know that in the past, the US has had a major role in being a leash around Israel's neck, as in going back to Ronald Reagan when Israel was conducting the war in Lebanon. He just made a phone call to the then president of Israel, the then prime minister of Israel, and he ended the bombardment, the carpet bombing that they were doing in Beirut then. So we know that they still have a lot of pull. Now Israel has become quite an indolent child. People describe it as the albatross around the US's neck. It can't seem to control this spoiled child of international law as much as it used to be able to. So in terms of sanctions, we know that the US has tried to withhold some aid to regiments in the Israeli army which have not complied with international law. We might see more of that kind of whitewashing where the US is trying to show that it doesn't approve of the war crimes that we're seeing live streamed onto our phones every day. But beyond that, I don't see much changing, and especially with the likelihood of a Trump presidency, Trump is going to be perhaps much worse than Biden because of Kushner's plan for the Middle East. And we know what that looks like. That map shows a completely fragmented Palestine, One which is there is no hope for a Palestinian state if Trump was to come into power.
But in terms of member states, which, as you said, the European member states, will that not lead to more pressure? Are we, I would like to hope that perhaps, we are not, the US to take a stand. Like you talked about the Lebanon situation and, earlier on as far as the US is concerned. Why can't there be a repeat of that? Or is that too optimistic?
Yeah, I think that we're just in very, very different times now, given the Israeli-US relationship and the way in which Israel has grown as a technological superpower in the region and as a nuclear superpower in that region. So I think that Israel is less likely to want to retreat on this front, especially, and bearing in mind the fact that Netanyahu has corruption charges, plus also an arrest warrant against him at The Hague. He does not want to get out of power, and the only way he's going to stay in power is if the war continues.
Fair enough. Dr. Jamil, what about reparation? There's also, as far as the ICJ is concerned, they've also talked about full reparations by Israel for its internationally wrongful acts, including restitution, compensation, satisfaction. Of course, we want the tyranny, we want the brutality to stop. Do you think that perhaps, some form of restitution might happen also? At some stage, or is that also something that is not realistic and not on the cards at all?
Well, there are only three courses of action in the international arena where one could have this. One is the traditional diplomacy, the legal diplomacy, and the politically how do we cover it. Now, the legal diplomacy we have discussed, it's a full violation. It's a complete violation of Article 49 of Geneva Convention, full violation of additional protocol of Geneva Convention, Article 20, full violation of Article 8 of the ICC. But despite that, who cares? That's number one. Number two, then what are the other things available under Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter? The sanction could be imposed. Obviously, it's through the Security Council. Then if Israel doesn't really still follow the international law, then Chapter 7. But now our other the panelists were talking about the forthcoming government in the United States, the Trump government. Now, Trump had already, given his mind, and in his previous tenure, Trump had shifted against the UN law, against UN resolution, against international law. Shifted his embassy, U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and also brought one or two more countries. He unilaterally violated the U.S. president violated and recognized Golan Heights as the territory of Israel. Although Golan Heights still is a disputed territory, it was occupied during 1967, and even yesterday's ruling of the ICJ is very clear as to what is to be done with the occupied territory. It says even removal of settlement from the West Bank. It says that all the settlements should be, and the occupation should be vacated. And I've already given you the international, the articles of international. This ICJ in 1922, General Assembly had only asked for the opinion of ICJ. They have given it some big moral obligation. Now, there are regional organizations such as OIC, 57 member countries. They can impose sanction as a bloc. They can impose sanction bilaterally. They have not done it. That means we understand why they have not done it. From United States, the system of United States, if someone wants to really understand, it, it's John Shermail. He has written a book on the Jews' influence. That very clearly dilates upon why all the Congress members, why all the government machinery, why the media, why other financial institutions, they are totally under the influence of that network. So any forthcoming government, and more importantly, Trump government is not really going to follow any of the ICJ or ICC ruling or the judgment. So they are not going to do that. So what is the option left for Palestinians? Palestinians would keep having this repression. Keep, the kind of life in the history, there's such example is being given, more than about 170 or 190.
You're getting distorted. Let me come back to you. There's a little distortion. Dr. Salma, you heard what Dr. Jamil is saying. Do you think that, what is the future? And let's talk about it. Is it going to continue relentlessly as far as, Israel is concerned? Is it going to continue the way it's been continuing?
Let's try and be slightly optimistic. Post this verdict by the ICJ, countries of the world who are already supporting the Palestinian cause and who are raising their voice in favor of Palestinian cause, plus those countries which are not supporting but their public is very, very vocal in favor of Palestinian cause and the reparations that are taking place there, they would rally and put pressure on their countries. And we have this scenario where more countries then start talking about Israel pulling out of the territories and stopping its acts of impunity and the tyranny that it has launched there. If it doesn't do it, that means bilateral country-to-country specific or bloc-specific sanctions. Once those sanctions officially happen from country to country, that is going to have a lot of impact.
You think that there is a chance that we are looking at more sanctions?
So I'm saying that this is one hypothetical way of looking at optimistic.
For example, from the European countries?
Yes, there could be. There could be. But it entirely depends. But if it doesn't happen, then the only thing is how the things appear right now. Palestinians will be getting killed every hour, more children would be dying. It's going to be an organized apartheid, it's going to be an organized genocide of the Palestinians, which all of us will see happening, unfolding right before our eyes. And the Palestinians are going to fight till the last Palestinian left on that land. And we will talk about it endlessly and nothing will happen.
Let's talk about the possibility, Dr. Jamil. Let's talk about the possibility. Let's explore this a little bit. The possibility of these sanctions coming from, for example, the European countries, and their impact overall on, for example, countries like the US again.
Well, a European country has given reaction of this. And they've said that now we have to make a choice between supporting the institutions, which means United Nations and its organs, or the supporting Israel. So that's the statement which has come in. So far, we must realize that most of the European countries, they toe the line and they are the ally of the United States. And therefore, in most cases, not almost all the cases, they support the Security Council resolution and in General Assembly also. Rarely they give a dissenting kind of their vote. So I am not really that much hopeful, but this time I can feel that there are one or two, maximum three countries, they might as well openly support this judgment and openly start thinking of imposing bilateral sanction. But because they are so much dependent on the interlinked economy, political side, the NATO and all, that it will be very hard for any country to take. The country which could have taken the decision, the countries, I would say, the bloc, which is formed under Chapter 8 of the United Nations, and that is a regional organization, like any other regional organization, it's the OIC. And we have seen the performance of OIC. Their own Article 8, 9, they are very clear. And even Article 1, it clearly dilates upon the Palestinian causes. And one of the article, it has even especially dedicated to have an additional Secretary General to deal with this matter. So with all that, and we only saw two summits, and one of the summits and the resolutions also are fresh in our mind. It was not any strong resolution which could indicate towards the sanction. Otherwise, 57 countries, if nothing else, they all could unanimously pass a resolution and send it to the Security Council for imposing a sanction. At the most, it will be vetoed, but at least it will be registered from all the countries and all the member countries, such as. In fact, see how daring a step the South Africans have taken, and some more countries. So if we bloc like OIC or African Union, if they take these steps, then there will be a huge pressure. Now the pressure is a pressure of the muscles. That is, see what Houthis are doing, see what Hamas, how they are holding the ground, see how the things are heated up in the Lebanon, Hezbollah. So, and which obviously is not a good sign, which is detrimental to the very first chapter of the United Nations Charter. It definitely endangers the peace and security of the world, and that is why the United Nations was created. But the things are not really very comfortable for the entire world community, because Gaza, Ukraine, and particularly these two burning, and for us, obviously, the Kashmir also, but Gaza and Ukraine too, the flashpoint. And with the bloc politics,
Let me include Dr. Adnan. Dr. Adnan, as far as the UN itself is concerned, with the conflicts like Palestine and Israel have really, highlighted the disparity that exists within the UN, and the way that it is structured as far as its Security Council is concerned, the power of veto, all of that. Do you think in the next coming years that is something that may change, or that is something that is a cause of concern now and is being thought about as far as the world generally is concerned? Because we can clearly see the disparity there, the issues there, the ineffectiveness also, in these cases have been highlighted as far as the UN is concerned, where, Antonio Guterres himself is saying again and again, and, calling out things for what they are.
Well, the point is here that as far as this Secretary General of the United Nations and his whole team is concerned, they have done a marvelous job. They have been very outspoken in condemning Israel and genocide and killings of the people and damaging of the hospitals, the health services. I have not seen such kind of a General Secretary. But you see, the point is that actually, to be very honest, it is not just the United Nations which is incapable, but the states of the world, the powerful, the P5. And I think that when it is said that the United Nations P5 ought to be reformed, and it no longer holds this kind of a veto or blackmail power, you see, that is a very right demand. I mean, if it's increased to 15, or already they are 5 to 10, and overall 25, so 2/3 majority of the votes, though you see they may be permanent members, the other non-permanent, but would be a better kind of a system. See, this is a dictatorial power in the New World Order, which they claim to be democratic. It's a totally dictatorial bloc P5. Yet, you see, I would say that I will be speaking not to be sounding very simple, but you see, a lesson of history. The law of history says that such kind of killings and foreign occupation cannot continue forever. I think this is the last foreign colonial project in the world. And even if some battles are won by Israel, the war would be certainly won by the Palestinians. And for this, you see, though you see they are saying that we are going to completely wipe out Hamas and secure Gaza for us, and then we will stop the war. Yes, they will stop the war at this point. But then what will happen if the Palestinians keep on having a serious political dissent and do not allow Israel to work? Then again, I think if it is a two-state solution or a one-state solution, but Israel has become in its own place permanently insecure, I would believe.
Your quick comments, we're also running out of time, but I'd like your input overall. Do you agree with what Dr. Adnan is saying?
I totally agree with that, and unfortunately the price of that insecurity would be paid by the Palestinian people only. If Israel is insecure, it will find some excuse, and even the slightest of that, to reignite the fire, and then this entire process would restart. And by the time the international bodies kick in and they do all the legislations in favor of the Palestinians, again we would find a repeat of several thousand people getting killed and going back to the basics. So unless and until there is a lasting, permanent, sustained solution to this problem, and Israel is harnessed and Israel is made not to do what it has been doing, it is not going to stop. And that is a very difficult catch-22 situation as to who and how do you build this particular cat, which is totally renegade. And with Trump coming in picture, things look far more difficult.
Great. Right. Dr. Jamil, your comments also. Of course, we know that it seems like, it looks like Trump is coming into the picture. But, of course, the ruling also, I think things are not all as dark as one would have thought, because this ruling definitely does show that there is some light.
No, definitely there's some light, and all the demonstration and procession all over the Europe and the United States and other parts of the world, those were also showing some lights and some hopes. But then the rulers of these countries who are supporting Israel, they are, on one tangent, and the public of those countries on the other tangent. So from that standpoint, I am not really seeing any light at the end of the tunnel for the solution of the Palestine. And it might as well engulf other countries, and it might as well blow up in a bigger conflict in the region. And that's what the worry is. Israel is not really ready. It's not ready to even accept very legitimate thing, even the ceasefire, which the United States also thought if it could be, some pause could be given in it, and it's not really agreeing. So that means it's the initial thought what they had given, their prime minister had given of Israel, that they all should be pushed in Sinai. And the way they had occupied 1967 and 1967, the West Bank and the other parts, they want to occupy Gaza. And it takes me to one point, that is 1897, the Greater Israel concept, Zionist summit, and what they thought, they're just trying to that very policy, and there is hardly any other logic one can find. The kind of brutality, the kind of atrocity, the kind of human rights violation, the kind of genocide which is taking place, and the kind of hue and cry from all over the world, from all the corners of the world. And if Israel is still supported, more than 700,000 tons of the bombs have been thrown, and the way the support still continues, and the forthcoming government of the United States, the Trump government, is going to further, if not further augmenting it, it's going to really maintain that pace. So that means I don't see, because the countries, the OIC countries, do not seem to pick up the courage to impose very legitimate sanctions, and therefore you'll find this militancy, and therefore you find that the military actions by certain factions, including Houthis, which has become a big problem for Israel. Day before yesterday, one of the drones that landed in building right in Tel Aviv. So the conflict could anytime flare up, and the Gulf countries in particular, and most of the countries of the world, they cannot really sustain that kind of a flare up, and it could be accidental.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Salma Malik, thank you for being with us. Dr. Adnan Sarwar Khan, thank you for joining us. Ayesha Malik, thank you for being with us. Of course, the ICJ ruling itself is certainly, certainly a huge step in the right direction. There is hope, but very, very cautious one. We also know the realities of world politics. We also know what's happening in countries, allies like the US, the politics that is happening internally also, and that the play there. But we also have cautious hope that there will be those countries that will take a stand, perhaps impose sanctions, and perhaps this will trigger the kind of action that is needed for the people that are suffering day in and day out as we talk. Even now, babies and children are being brutally murdered. Women, children are dying every day, and there seems little hope. But again, the world politics must realize that the public pressure, that the people of the world stand united with the Palestinians. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.